In March 2015, Saudi Arabia spearheaded a military campaign against its poor neighbor Yemen. The aim was purportedly to bring the country's ousted president back to power. The result has been, however, death and destruction of biblical proportions. During all these years, the Saudis have had an ulterior motive to let the bloody war rage on, plundering Yemen's almost untapped oil and gas reserves amidst spiraling chaos and power vacuum.
الحادث اللي حدث مؤلم جدا لجميع السعوديين.
Recently, US-based Mint Press News published an expose of Saudi measures to conclude long-term agreements over Yemen's oil and gas resources with the regime of Yemen's ex-president Abdulrabuh Mansur Hadi. According to the report, the Saudis are seeking to gain control over Al-Jaf, Marib, Shabwa, and Hadramaut, 4 provinces with huge oil reserves. According to the source of the leak, who is thought to be close to Hadi, negotiations have already begun between the Saudi state-owned oil company Aramco and the Hadi camp. Jalal al-Salahi, a well-known Yemeni activist, has recently claimed in a new video clip to have a copy of the agreement. In the video, which he speaks in Arabic, al-Salahi says that according to the agreement, Riyadh is to pay $15 billion to the Hadi regime in return for 70 years of oil concessions in Al-Jaf province. The agreement, if true, is daylight robbery in the sense that the cabinet of the fugitive president holds no legal status in the country anymore. Moreover, it is now an open secret that Hadi and his high-ranking officials are under house arrest in the Saudi kingdom and therefore have no real say in negotiating with the Saudis.
The fact that the regime of Abdurrabuh Mansur Hadi has engaged in what is basically a sellout of the country, basically selling out the rights to Yemeni oil reserves for a relatively quite a meager sum of $15 billion US, which is compared to the wealth, of course, that oil can and gas can bring in revenue, is very meager, very little. This is not a surprising thing because, of course, we have to bear in mind that Abdurrabuh Mansur Hadi is the one who has betrayed his country. He has fled Yemen back in 2015 after the revolution of September 21, 2014, in which Ansar Allah led a revolutionary struggle, despite the fact that he was not really forced out of power completely. In fact, the revolutionary government back then offered him a hand in an olive branch, let's say, in negotiations, and he refused this. So when you see that he has decided to also start selling out the Yemeni oil wealth, this is basically the next very tragic but logical step in his plan, in his campaign of betrayal of the country.
In fact, Riyadh's relations with its poor neighbor is fraught with such exploitative moves. The 1934 Treaty of Taif is a case in point under which Yemen was forced to hand the fledgling Saudi state control over its own provinces of Jizan, Najran, and Asir. Since the onset of the war, the Saudis have not allowed the Yemenis to carry out oil exploration in Al-Jaf through constant attacks. According to WikiLeaks, Riyadh has been blocking Yemen's investments in its own oil reserves since the 1970s, particularly in Al-Jaf, which has most of the country's oil reserves. The Saudis have shown that they don't usually bother themselves even with such sham agreements when it comes to Yemeni crude. In fact, oil theft has been daily since the war outbreak in the Yemeni provinces such as Shabwa, Hadramaut, and Al-Mahra. In the heat of their oil price war with Russia, the Saudis reportedly tripled their oil theft, desperately to win a victory.
Yemen does not only have significant oil reserve, but also liquefied natural gas, which is something that the Saudis can be looking to put their hands on, because it is considered to be a possible replacement, or at least a very preferable alternative to typical petroleum. This is also one of the reasons, of course, why the Saudis got into conflict with Qatar a few years ago. Secondly, of course, as has been said before, the oil price battle that they waged with Russia and that the Saudis have used to try to damage the economy of Russia by constantly lowering the price of oil and by pumping up more and more petroleum in their own country, they have, of course, also damaged their own economy. So every single extra source of oil and gas that they can find is, of course, an extra bonus for Saudi Arabia in order to continue the oil price battle and continue to be relevant on the world scale.
By many credible accounts, since 2015, 65% of produced oil in the war-stricken country has been looted by the Saudis and their Emirati allies. There are also reports about the plundering of Yemeni oil by militant groups allied with Saudi Arabia and the UAE in Marib and other eastern provinces. According to the leader of Yemen's Houthi Ansarullah movement, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, more than 120 million barrels of crude oil have been looted by Saudi Arabia and the UAE since 2016. Figures released by Yemen Ministry of Oil and Minerals also indicate that up to 2010, Yemen was estimated to produce around 350,000 barrels of oil per month. But by 2015, due to Saudi crippling measures, Yemen was barely able to produce more than 35,000 barrels per day. According to Trading Economics, Riyadh has stripped Yemen of revenues from the sale of at least 70,000 barrels a day since the start of the war, a total of over $6 billion. With that amount of money, the Yemenis would have been in a much better financial condition.
Ever since Saudi Arabia was founded in the 1920s, 1930s, they have always seen Yemen as a potential danger, as a sort of competitor in every single aspect, both economical, as political, and also religiously. That's why one of the first wars that Saudi Arabia waged was in 1934, the war against Yemen, in which they took over several important key provinces of Greater Yemen, such as Najran and Jizan, which are now considered part of southern Saudi Arabia. So Yemen is an ancient nation that has a very important role in Islamic history, and has a very important part as well in the geopolitical structure of the Middle East and of the Red Sea region, and even goes as far as having an influence on North Africa and on the subcontinent of India and Pakistan. So when you see this important historical aspect being played out, there is a very deep-rooted fear in Saudi Arabia that Yemen will constantly be a threat, a danger to the relatively new invention that is Saudi Arabia, an invention created by the British and propped up by the Americans. So the Saudis are afraid of a truly sovereign and self-sufficient Yemen, and that is why they have been funding corrupt regimes, they have been funding rebel groups, they have been funding terrorist movements since the 1970s, and they've also been trying to destabilize Yemen ever since the 1970s, and even before, to make sure that Yemen will not be self-sufficient in terms of oil and gas, and will definitely not be a major export and major exporter of oil and gas, because that would threaten, of course, the bottom line of the Saudi kingdom.
The Saudi kingdom has the world's second largest proven petroleum reserves and is the largest exporter of petroleum in the world. Yet that has not dissuaded the Saudi regime from attacking one of the poorest countries in the world, or at least from looting its oil reserves.
والله أنهم يقاتلون وأعلنهم على جزيرة العرب